Welcome back to The Mature Male. I'm your host, Wes, a practicing psychotherapist with a focus on helping people find meaning and direction, heal from trauma, and mature through practical guidance and wisdom. Disappointment is one of the most common yet challenging emotional experiences we face, whether it's a relationship that didn't work out, a career setback, or life simply not meeting our expectations. How we process these inevitable letdowns doesn't just affect our immediate emotional state, but shapes our approach to future opportunities, relationships, and dreams. Today, we're exploring how to navigate disappointment in ways that foster resilience and wisdom rather than bitterness and disengagement, transforming these painful experiences from mere setbacks into catalysts for growth. The approach we're going to be using today is transformation versus minimization of disappointment. We'll explore the psychology behind different responses to disappointment, examine how these responses shape life trajectories over time, and offer practical approaches for processing disappointment in ways that expand rather than contract your life. What if disappointment isn't just an unfortunate emotional state to overcome, but a necessary teacher about our expectations, values, and capacity for growth? Let's get into it. Segment 1, the principle, the disappointment paradox. Acceptance creates possibility. When we fully acknowledge disappointment, it paradoxically creates a greater capacity for hope and engagement compared to premature positivity or emotional suppression. Whatever the disappointment you have in your life, something really small, like a date not working out, or something really big, not getting that job or opportunity that you were expecting to work out, or maybe it's family related. Regardless of the type of disappointment, our immediate urge is to either dismiss it through premature positivity, which is attempting to manifest the positive potentiality of a situation by ignoring the realities of that situation. Or we try to suppress all the emotions that come with being disappointed by ignoring and minimizing how we really feel. Our ability to genuinely accept what we're disappointed about creates future possibility. So how does this play out in our lives? We're going to talk about the relationship between disappointment, expectation, and meaning, including how our most painful disappointments often reveal what matters most to us. So let's start with defining disappointment. Disappointment is any feeling of being let down, whether that's by a person, a expectation, a narrative, or a situation. The official definition of disappointment is a sadness or displeasure caused by the non-fulfillment of one's hopes or expectations. We cannot define disappointment without including expectations. So what are expectations? Expectations are any projected or anticipated outcomes that we believe to be true and hope that they happen. That's an expectation. It's a future vision of something that you are aiming towards in anticipation of it actually happening. And the last word, meaning. Meaning is the subjective value that we find in something. It's existential. It's not black and white. It is nuanced, but it is the very core motivation as to why we do the things that we do. So how do these three definitions interplay with each other? Disappointment is a combination of the level of expectations that you have, how much you are predicting an outcome. The meaning is your value within that prediction and potentiality, and the combination of those determines how disappointed we are in any given situation. The things that we are most let down about, that continue to bother us and linger after we have been let down, how much we feel the cost The suffering and the pain of a disappointment reveals how much it matters to us. It's a fine line between caring too much and not caring enough. So what is the appropriate amount of care and attention that we need to give to situations? But regardless, that level of letdown shows what matters most to us. The disappointment functions as a value clarification experience. It is fully subjective on the meaning that you extract out of a situation, and it reveals those things. The first step in dealing with disappointment is not to immediately give into the emotional repercussions of the letdown, to be swept up by them like it's a tidal wave, but to acknowledge the disappointment and then start to reflect, process, and explore what the disappointment means and what it is showing you about what you care about, what you were expecting, what you wanted to work out but didn't. That is important, first of all, for the reason of understanding who you are and how you see the world in general. Second, it helps refine your sense of expectations by filtering it through what is realistic. Maybe you are unrealistically expecting something to work out and you find a lot of meaning in that, and therefore you get let down in a major way. You need to change your level of expectations and the value you perceive in it. An example here, I have a client who is dating. And every time he gets rejected by a date, he goes into a depression spiral. It truly throws him off kilter. It affects his whole week, and he internalizes it after being rejected so many times to ask and to question his worth as a person. Our work together is for him to change the expectations. What is he looking to get out of or hoping will happen in these situations on these dates? Lowering that to a more realistic standard or outcome. The second is his perceived meaning within the date. A date is important because it is a step in leading you to finding a life partner. But it is someone that you barely know, you've only been on a few dates with, and they deny or reject you, there should not be this immense amount of value that you give to them, and therefore you internalize by them when they reject you. So we're working on trying to change how much meaning and value he is putting into the person that is rejecting him. Those two components, expectations and values, are directly correlated with how deeply disappointed he is and how much the disappointment affects his life. Understanding what are the values that he has, how does he want to express those, and what are his goals that we can continue to work towards in a way that feels realistic and approachable, but that would resonate with him as being worth pursuing. Let's talk about some myth-busting misconceptions about disappointment. Why positive thinking alone doesn't effectively address disappointment and may create additional suffering through emotional invalidation. There are limits of having purely cognitive approaches to emotional experiences. As men, we can often bypass acknowledging the true disappointment by finding something positive to focus on. On a neurological level, this is because disappointment brings a perceived sense of pain and threat. We get let down, it feels bad, we don't want to feel bad, so we focus on something positive to distract and get our attention away from the pain in a way that helps us not feel as painful. In this moment, while it makes sense that it feels better to use positivity to bypass the disappointment, it's ultimately not helpful. What we know to be true when it comes to health is our ability to be exposed to consistent, intentional, acute stress. Think cold hot therapy, exercise, meditation, conflicts. All of those situations, habits, and activities intentionally done build up a resilience and a deeper capacity to prevent more chronic stress. think diseases, disorders, divorces, or major relational ruptures, disappointment operates in a similar way as the acute intentional stress does. By actively dealing with the pain and acknowledging it, and exploring the meaning and understanding of it, one, it loses the perceived power it has over us. We create some separation from it. Two, as we stay with it and work it out, we learn how to reset our expectations, reset our meaning, and it allows us to be more effective by being more accurately disappointed. Think about it like a gap. When you are younger, you have unrealistic expectations. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a professional baseball player. I want to marry this actress. Crazy high expectations, the reality and the capability down here. As we mature and get older, we learn to close that gap by refining our expectations to match our realities and capabilities that we have. Therefore, as we get older, ideally we are getting disappointed less often and we are more accurately being disappointed. Meaning we are setting expectations, there are standards, there are things we hope work out, but they are processed and projected out of what we know to be true and what we know to be capable. The other thing that it does as we close the gap is because there's not as much of a letdown happening through the bigger gap, the negative consequences and repercussions of the disappointment become smaller and smaller. In short, we get over things quicker. We learn not to take things so serious. We see the disappointment as a reflection of where we missed the mark or what is truly going on within us. And we're thankful for that insight and truth, and we move forward out of that place. If we take a purely cognitive approach, we're missing the meaning that we have behind something because the meaning is subjective, it's abstract, and it's nuanced, which means we cannot process disappointment in a formulaic manner. This is often where shame can come in. Let's say that you were expecting to get a raise and you didn't get one. Very disappointed, and you immediately think, what's wrong with me? Oh, my boss doesn't like me. I was wrong in thinking I was as good as I was, or why do I even try and ask because it doesn't matter. People don't care about me. The reality behind that is it was most likely an objective reason you didn't get a promotion. Maybe the company was struggling, they didn't have enough funds to allocate towards that, or maybe the company went through a recent change in leadership and the focus and values changed, or maybe you misunderstood that expectation and promotions don't happen for another year, or that you weren't up for the promotion or to the degree that you thought you were. So those are all objective reasons. Most of the time when those things don't work out, work related, there's an objective reason. It's not that someone is out to get you. But when we get disappointed, we internalize those things subjectively because we find the meaning in it and we personalize it. We create narratives that are in our heads about the people and situations that we have. If we use a purely cognitive approach, we miss that insider understanding about the disappointment. Think about disappointment more as a misaligned relationship with something, someone, or a situation rather than a direct transactional relationship that is formulated, that the input equals the output. Do not bypass the need to feel the disappointment. And we're going to talk about how to do that. But it's starting with the acknowledgement and awareness of it happening on an experiential level. Resilience isn't about avoiding disappointment or bouncing back quickly, but about integrating these experiences into a larger narrative of growth. We'll talk about misconceptions about what emotional strength looks like. Us men are awful about thinking we just need to grind it out, overcome it, push through it, challenge ourselves to rise to the occasion. All these phrases ignore the sensitivity and the vulnerability of being disappointed. When we admit we're disappointed, that is a vulnerable exposure of a perceived sense of being let down, which often is interpreted as failure. What is wrong with me that this situation did not work out? If we jump right into avoiding it by not acknowledging that we feel pain or wishing it worked out, and we just try to move on, or we acknowledge it but we quickly try to move on from it, then those things do not sit with the sensitivity of what the disappointment actually did to you. And you will reactively cope with it in a way that does not help you improve or become a more mature man. Every time we are disappointed, it is a gift. You're probably thinking, what the hell, a gift? How are you saying that? It's a gift because it's a insight into who we are, what life is, and what the situation was about. And it's an opportunity for us to learn about ourselves in that situation. It's never comfortable to acknowledge the disappointment, but our ability to gives us a deeper understanding of the value of the disappointment in a way that helps us move forward in a more integrated, holistic manner. It's a larger narrative of growth. To start with, if you're not getting disappointed enough, that means you are apathetic, disassociated, and not trying enough, taking enough risk. That is not good. Just because you are avoiding disappointment and avoiding the pain doesn't mean that's a good thing. So if you are someone that is reflecting on how often you experience disappointment and you think to yourself very rarely, you need to take more risk. You need to be challenged. You need to explore and try different things. We don't get disappointed about things that don't have a risk involved in them. On the flip side, maybe you are someone that is always disappointed. People are always letting you down and situations are never working out. You are putting too much value, too much expectations on the people and situations around you in a way that may be coming from entitlement. You think you deserve that. You think people should do this or that you should get this or that out of a situation. Maybe it is a cry for wanting to be cared for, but we are too shameful to ask. So we put the blame on everyone and everything else around us. And that disappointment settles in and internalizes at, well, they don't care, or I'm not worth it, or whatever that personal narrative is. Again, we need to look at the relationship you have to that situation to understand why you're disappointed. You don't want to be on either of those extremes. You want to try to find a middle ground. The misconceptions we have about emotional strength often looks like cognitively overcoming and persevering in a situation that feels matter of fact and straightforward. That is not the case. If you are not struggling, it is not real. If it is not real, it is not meaningful. To think emotional strength is robotically processing a disappointment, accepting it right away, and moving on is not living life in its authentic form. You are trying to be somewhere in a state that you are not. It requires a vulnerability and admission of weakness because the disappointment comes from either someone letting you down or you letting you down. And both of those are painful to accept. The strength comes through the admission, the acknowledgement, and the awareness of that. And out of that place, moving into more wisdom, insight, and reform in how you move forward. To simply try to overcome things in a manner that does not acknowledge the experiential part of it is wrong. We have to start with understanding that disappointment matters. Many of us men need to acknowledge it as a more normalized part of our day-to-day life. When we are so set on being successful health-wise or financially, which are the two things that most men often want to succeed in, those are rational and they are straightforward, they are fully understandable, and they allow our egos to be propped up because they say if you work hard, you can trust that it's going to work out, and here's your reward for it working out. Many times, though, we need to focus on the more vulnerable, real goals and things like relationships, romantically, friendships. I mean, how often do I hear men try to express a disappointment in a friend not texting them back or being rude to them or a girl rejecting them? And instead of acknowledging that and processing it, it becomes something like, oh, it's fine. It's whatever. I'm not worried about it. It is what it is. I'm okay. All those statements minimize and put up a shield from processing the realities of the scope of consequence and effects of a situation. We need to let those shields down so we can truly get into the realities of how we feel and how things affect us inside. So let's talk about real life applications in this. I want to share a personal story of transformation through effectively processing disappointment. When I was in my mid to late 20s, I was playing music and at one point thought that's what I wanted to do as a career. I had made one album and I had moved to New York City from Atlanta and wanted to do another project. There was a part of me that thought, if this project goes well, maybe I can continue to do music. Although I had to pay for it myself and put in all the time and energy to bootstrap it, and I poured a lot of effort into this project. And I was expecting it to work out, to get support, for it to gain traction, and for people to want to listen to it, for there to be some sort of demand. I make the record, I put it out, and it basically flops. Outside of my close friends and family, no one really listened to it. I was disappointed. That bothered me. I was hurt that I didn't feel like there was enough support given or attention. I felt disrespected and that I perceived there was a lot of value in my music and other people weren't seeing that. I was jealous because there were other friends that I knew that were writing who were a part of stronger, more cohesive communities. They were better writers than me, and their music took off and created that demand and attention that I was looking for. I was sad because I had moved to New York and I was away from my main community that did support me at one time, where I could play the songs and spread the word. I felt very lonely in New York, felt isolated at that time when I was creating the project. And all of this, there was an underlying grieving that was coming from realizing that this music project was my last ditch effort to try to hold on to an old world, an old reality, an old set of comforts in living back south that was starting to end. I knew I didn't want to move back, but I had nothing to show for my current life at the time in New York. In fact, things were not good. I was working a low-paying job. I could barely afford rent. I didn't have a lot of friends. That album not working out, I took and internalized that as, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with this situation? I can't believe that this happened. I had to sit with all of those emotions, narratives, and meanings within the disappointments and start to sort through them. As I did, each one became a mirror for me, showing me one by one, step by step, what I just shared with you. And if I had just internalized that and moved on, or pushed it down and ignored it, I wouldn't have had all those insights that I'm sharing today. Each of those insights allowed me to come to terms with those things, to accept the reality, and to reset my expectations, to let go of narratives and emotional strongholds and patterns that I was holding on to, and to come to terms with the transition period I was in, the true skill level I had, the lack of community and support and what that looked like. All that perpetuated my healing and integration that allowed me to fully show up into my life at the time and to start to appreciate that. Despite nothing around me affirming that value and that purpose, I was still very much in that stage of, why am I here? I should go back. This isn't worth it. I'm a failure. And facing all of that through the project allowed me to come to terms with it, see it for what it is, learn from it, integrate it, and take it with me as I continue to transition into my new stage of life, which meant less music playing and writing and affirmation in that role within the community of playing music. I'm so thankful for that experience because it really made me ask this question about creating. Did I create simply because the project was worth creating, or did I attach an unnecessary mandatory outcome from the project? Well, unless the project does this or makes me feel this way or gives me this, then it's worth it. I had to come to terms as a creator, as an artist, that it was worth creating for the sake of creating. That has since allowed me to still write music and create, and now I'm getting opportunities to play songs in community, to have a place where I can continue to write and where people appreciate it and are letting me know how positively impacted they were by the music I'm creating. It looks a lot different than how it used to when I lived in Atlanta and even at the time of the project. But that spirit of creating and the music still resides within me, and my recalibration of the expectations, of dealing with the disappointments, of coming to terms to things and changing my relationship with music and creating allowed me to move forward and set it free and let it be what it is. So let's talk about some common disappointment response patterns. The first two are avoidance and minimization. The pattern of downplaying the significance of disappointments or distracting from the emotional experience, which prevents integration and learning. We'll explore the short-term relief but long-term costs of this approach. We touched on this briefly earlier, but to use the example of dating, this can often happen when a man tries to date, he gets rejected, and he puts the blame on the woman. Well, she's a bitch, or she is boring, or her loss. Those are internalized hurts that we project onto the person that we perceive as causing the pain towards us. But that person was just doing what was best for them. Now, how they did it, maybe they could have done it better. That's true. But you can only be responsible for you and your ability to realize the personal significance you find in something is found in that disappointment. Instead of distracting yourself from the emotional experience, take it, learn from it, integrate it, and don't receive the short-term relief because it's a long-term cost. Going back to the consistent acute stress, which is pain, preventing the long-term chronic stress, here we see the opposite. When we seek short-term comfort consistently and we want to be coddled or not feel the full pain and consequences of a situation or something not working out, that creates a long-term pain, suffering, dissatisfaction, and perpetual disappointment. Then rumination and identity fusion, the tendency to become consumed by disappointment, allowing it to define identity and future expectations. We'll talk about how this pattern creates unnecessary suffering and limitation. Using the dating example and my client, he was disappointed so often, he started to see himself as a disappointment because he said, if I'm rejected so much, then I have to be the problem. It's me. He now has moved from disappointment is something that happens to disappointment is something that I am. That's a difficult place to be because when we identify with something at that level, it is extremely hard to separate it because we don't see any separation. We see that narrative, that feeling, that experience as who we are. We do not need to allow ourselves to be consumed by the disappointment and therefore permanently project what's going to happen. In this case, I am the disappointment. Therefore, I know I will be disappointed every single time I date. Women rejecting me will always make me feel like a failure. You see how that has moved from a temporary experience that can't be said to be true for everyone at all times for this person to this is an absolute. It is the way life is. There is no other way to see it, to engage with it, and to process it. This creates an unnecessary suffering, and it limits us because we are only seeing things through that one way of thinking. So I want you to think about, where have I cast a permanent disappointment? Maybe that's in a relationship with a family member. Oh, this person will always be like this. I will always feel hurt and dismissed. Maybe it is with your job. I will never get the raise I deserve or work a job that feels connected to who I am. I will always feel disappointed by this person, this situation. Take those things, let them come to mind, and break the spell of identifying with it on an identity level. The long-term impact of disappointment processing. Risk tolerance and life engagement affects how your typical response to disappointment shapes willingness to pursue meaningful but uncertain opportunities in the future. We'll examine the relationship between disappointment processing and life constriction and expansion. Because disappointment is a projection of what could be, the potential of what could happen, how we consistently deal with that prediction and that desired outcome, that vision casting, will shape how willing we are to pursue meaningful but uncertain opportunities. We don't want to project so meaningfully and so elevated that we are extremely disappointed. At the same time, we don't want to stop taking risk and finding meaning. It's important we use the disappointment as an understanding for how to properly expect, how to accurately find meaning in something that allows us to consistently take risks, but in a way where we can more properly predict an outcome based on the capabilities, and we can resonate with the meaning that feels true, real, and authentic to who we are as a person. When we process disappointment in an effective manner, what that looks like is that we are able to see a situation and outcome for what it is. We're able to face where we misread it or misinterpreted it. We then take that information and learn from it and integrate it as a new set of data that we use to then expect differently in the future and find meaning differently in the future. That is the difference between life constriction and expansion. People that deal with disappointment well live an expanded life. They don't overshoot for expectations, but they don't disassociate and become apathetic. So ask yourself, am I expanding my life or contracting it? And how does disappointment play into that? Next, the relationship approach consequences. The way disappointment handling affects capacity for vulnerability, trust, and authentic connection in relationships. We'll discuss how unprocessed disappointment often creates protective patterns. Let's say you are in a romantic relationship with someone and you have a certain expectation of how often you should have sex. You have a strong sex drive and you love this person, you want to connect with them, and they often don't show the same reciprocation as far as interest or openness to have sex as often as you do. That can feel disappointing because then you try to make an effort to make a move or connect. We call it warming up the oven. And you're told, I'm too tired, don't touch me, not tonight. All those things can feel disappointing. If you do not process those first for yourself, but then with that person, it builds up and will lead you to disconnect from that person, and you will try to find fulfilled expectations somewhere else, whether that is through substance abuse, friendships, or other types of relationships. But that disappointment is from that person, that expectation can only be from that person. That meaning can only be from that person. Therefore, trying to substitute it and find it in other things will inevitably fail and will be ineffective. What you want to do is be vulnerable, process how you were disappointed, trust that other person cares about you, and authentically express that disappointment to that person in a way that doesn't feel demanding or entitled or judgmental. So it's not, you never want to do this. I can't believe you would do this. What's wrong with me that you don't want to connect this way? Whatever the temptation is to approach in those more defensive and hurt manners, resist. Have a conversation that looks like this. I want to be honest about something that has been hurtful and I've been let down by. I really appreciate when we connect physically, especially through sex. And when I try to make a bid for connection or for us to start that process and I get rejected or denied, that's disappointing. And then I get frustrated because I was expecting or hoping that we could do that and we don't. Can you let me know, is it something that I'm doing personally or just where you're at and your capabilities and desires? Then you talk through that. Then you find out she does want to connect with you, but you're an asshole to her. And when you make certain comments with that attitude, it turns her off. Well, fair enough. That's something you need to work on. Or maybe she has a different expectation. She says, well, I was thinking once a month is good. And you're like, once a month? Are you serious? Dry as a bone over here. That is a misaligned expectations. Face that by having a conversation of compromise. How could she challenge herself to be more open to doing it more? How could you have an openness to doing it less? The point is that you experience an authentic connection by allowing the disappointment to be an invitation to connection, not as a shield, a barrier, or a denial to disassociation, to disconnection. You want to use the disappointment as an insight, as a gateway, as an understanding of who you are, of who they are, and what your relationship is in a way where you move forward and you don't have to be as protective anymore. You'll still get disappointed. You won't get disappointed as often. And when you do get disappointed, it won't have as much of a negative effect for as long as it does. Now, each of you know each other better and the relationship in that particular dynamic of physical intimacy in a way that will allow you to feel more understood and connected instead of on different pages, disconnected and trying to find your own meaning and expectations outside of the relationship. Let's move into the final segment, practical tools and applications. First, let's start with a framework called the disappointment integration. First is the emotional acknowledgement practice. This is a structured approach for fully recognizing and expressing the genuine feelings associated with disappointment without being defined by them. The way this works is a bit of what I showed you when I was processing my own disappointment from that music project. You want to acknowledge, I am disappointed. Then ask yourself, what am I disappointed about? I'm disappointed that this didn't work out, that I felt this way from this situation or person, that I expected this, but this happened. And you just want to get a lay of the land. Everything that you're disappointed about, write it down somewhere. Then go through each of those components of the disappointment and look for the expectation and look for the meaning. What was I expecting in this component of the disappointment? What was the meaning that I found in it? And you go through each of those. Then you want to run it through reality and ask yourself, was that something that I should have expected? Maybe the disappointment is a sign of something that needed to happen but didn't. That is good. It's important to hold people accountable, to know that when they let you down, sometimes it's for a good reason that you feel let down and they need to do better. They need to change. They need to hold the standard that you have in a relationship. Then the meaning is subjective. So that's more of a conversation you have with that person or about that situation. Is this something that I found meaning in and I needed to? It was really important and I was disappointed that that meaning wasn't extracted or expressed. Or can I change my expectations? Can I change my meaning to deal with it differently? This also depends on your upbringing and your personality type. If you are someone that is more extroverted and emotionally in tune, empathetic, then you are more likely to see more potential in a situation and feel more sensitive and in touch with the emotions that come from being disappointed. Versus if you are more introverted or you don't take as much risk and you are more rational, then the way that you are going to process disappointment is going to be more, does it make sense? Did it not make sense? What needs to be corrected or changed in a more formulaic manner? Know thyself, know how you interpret the disappointment, and make sure that you are acknowledging the full scope of what that disappointment has done and the effects from it. Next, the meaning making process. How do you extract the valuable information contained within disappointment about values, expectations, and possibilities? Similar to the situation before, you're going to ask reflective questions to yourself. If I found this level of meaning in something, then what does that show about the value I have towards it? Same with that person. What's the narrative? Where am I at with that understanding of what matters to me and if that aligns? Next tool is the narrative integration approach. How to incorporate disappointment into your larger life story in ways that create meaning and direction rather than limitation. The frameworks here depend on the types of disappointment. What this is getting at is that everything you expect has a story correlated with it, a story you tell about yourself, about that person, or the situation. You need to review that story that's a script, and you need to process it in a way where you edit it to be more reflective of what is true within yourself in the situation or the relationship dynamic. Your constant refinement of that is editing the story, but it's also using these micro stories that you find in all the disappointments that you've had to inform how you see the larger narrative of your life. We talked earlier about how if you over-internalize disappointment to the point where you think you are a disappointment, that is detrimental. On the flip side, this framework allows you to see the disappointment in the isolated manner that it occurred, meaning what did this particular disappointment mean, then integrates it into the greater story by saying, how does this inform how I see myself and the life that I live? And those disappointments accumulated come together to make your life's expectations, your life's meaning, which ultimately inform the direction that you're heading and the purpose that you find as a person. So how do you move forward after disappointment? The first practice is the balanced re-engagement act. We'll talk about some techniques for pursuing new opportunities with appreciation and hope and investment after significant disappointments. This is finding the middle path between cynicism and naive optimism. There are things that you have disassociated from and are so disappointed in you haven't touched. Therefore, you've become cynical about them. You've let the narrative be, because I got let down, I will always be let down. That is how that is. Nothing can change that. Or maybe you've ignored it and you need to come to terms with it, but you haven't yet. So you're naively optimistic about it. Oh, that's fine. I know it hasn't worked out 10 times, but I'm just going to try one more time. I'm just going to go for it. This time I know it'll work, instead of coming to terms with the reality that maybe it will never work. How can you find that balance? By pursuing new opportunities with appropriate hope, meaning that you are accurately predicting what to put your faith in. And you invest in that meaning by taking care of the disappointment, by understanding it in a way on how to move forward. It's important that you remain open to meaningful possibilities while incorporating wisdom from past disappointments. The key takeaways and summaries: remember, disappointment isn't a sign that you've done something wrong or should necessarily lower your expectations, but it's an inevitable part of life lived with genuine hope and engagement. We talked about acknowledging disappointment as the place we need to start, to not deny it by suppressing it or be positive prematurely, some misconceptions about disappointment, how we cannot process it cognitively and invalidate the emotions that come with it by just trying to bulldoze our way through it or rationalize it and move on. My personal situation with being disappointed in how I responded, and that there are common response patterns within disappointment, which are avoidance and minimization, and rumination and identity fusion. Then we talked about the long-term impact of disappointment, how we don't want to allow it to get to an identity level, and we want to see it as a way to expand into life. And then we talked about some practical tools and applications, from how to acknowledge the disappointment, extract the meaning from it, and how to process the disappointment in a way that shows our conscious and implicit assumptions about a situation, and then therefore adjusting it to be more accurate. Then we've talked about how to move forward after disappointment and some practices on how to be appropriately hopeful. This week, if you're carrying significant disappointment, take time to apply the emotional acknowledgement practice we discussed. Give yourself permission to fully feel before moving to meaning making. See what's going on, come to terms with it, then process it and work through it. Until next time, remember that how you process disappointment doesn't just affect your present emotional state, but shapes the scope and quality of the life you'll create from here. That's it for me, and I'll see you next time.